What would you do if the receipt you kept in your wallet became the key to your freedom? For Mark Carter, a small mistake spiraled into years of wrongful imprisonment. Accused of embezzling millions, his life crumbled, but then a forgotten receipt resurfaced. Could this crumpled piece of paper prove his innocence? Stay with me until the very end, and don't forget to tap like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Because what comes next will test everything you thought you knew. Mark Carter sat in his cramped apartment, staring at the cold, hard walls that had confined him for 5 long years. The memory of his arrest still burned in his mind. He had been a trusted employee at a financial firm, until the day everything turned upside down. The police raided his office, accusing him of embezzling millions from the company. The evidence seemed airtight. As the trial unfolded, the prosecutor painted a damning picture of Mark's financial misdeeds. The press devoured the story, and soon, Mark was branded a criminal. The once respected analyst was now seen as a fraud. His colleagues avoided his gaze, and his friends disappeared. No one questioned the overwhelming evidence that convicted him. Mark's lawyer, Linda, had tried everything to prove his innocence, but every attempt fell short. No matter what they argued, the judge and jury seemed convinced. The evidence against him, particularly the forged transaction records, was impossible to ignore. Linda's hope waned, but Mark refused to accept his fate. He knew deep down that something didn't add up. The walls of Mark's cell felt tighter with each passing day. The court's decision had been final, and Mark was left alone to stew in the bitter taste of injustice. It wasn't just the years that were stolen from him, but the very essence of who he was. Accused of stealing from the very company that once trusted him, he couldn't understand why they hadn't given him a fair chance to explain. Then, one morning, while cleaning out his few belongings, Mark found it. Tucked away in a dusty folder, buried beneath a pile of forgotten papers, was an old receipt. It was from a dinner he'd had with his boss, Richard Blackwell, the day before everything had gone wrong. The transaction seemed insignificant, but something about it caught his attention. Could this small slip of paper really change everything? And then, the midnight knock split the silence. Mark sat up, heart racing. The receipt was dated the night before the alleged embezzlement was said to have taken place. Why had Blackwell claimed Mark was absent from the office that evening, when he had been right there with him? His pulse quickened as he examined the receipt, noticing the name of the restaurant and the total amount on the bill. It was a dinner, but why was Blackwell trying to bury it? Determined to find answers, Mark shared the receipt with Linda. She was skeptical at first, but after reviewing it, her interest peaked. The timestamp on the receipt was crucial. It proved Mark was dining with his boss when the supposed embezzlement occurred. But the biggest question remained: why hadn't anyone questioned Blackwell's alibi? It was time for them to dig deeper. Linda went to the restaurant to investigate, hoping to find more evidence. She discovered something alarming: the restaurant had been under new management since Mark's conviction. However, the manager, an older woman, recognized Mark's name. She told Linda about a phone call Blackwell had made to her that night, asking for the reservation to be altered. Something felt off. Linda's instincts told her they were getting closer to the truth. The more Linda uncovered, the darker the picture became. She tracked down other witnesses who recalled seeing Mark at the restaurant that night. Yet the prosecution had conveniently overlooked the evidence. As Linda presented this new information to Mark, he felt the weight of years of despair begin to lift. The puzzle pieces were finally falling into place. With Linda's research growing stronger, they prepared to confront Blackwell. Mark knew this would be the turning point in his life. Would his former boss admit to the lies? Or was Blackwell about to escalate his game, using his influence to silence them? The stakes had never been higher. Time was running out. Mark was desperate to reclaim his life. At a meeting with Blackwell, the truth finally emerged. Blackwell admitted, reluctantly, that he had fabricated the entire story to cover up his own theft. The company's financial discrepancies were the result of Blackwell's illicit actions, not Mark's. The very rule he had used to frame Mark had now condemned him. The very rule he used against him now condemned him. The evidence was stacking up against Blackwell. Mark had finally gotten his chance to speak out, and Linda was relentless in pushing for his exoneration. The press began to catch wind of the story, and Blackwell's reputation began to crumble. The weight of the injustice Mark had suffered was unbearable, but the truth was finally breaking through. As Linda prepared to file a motion for Mark's release, Blackwell's connections began to weaken. A former employee came forward with a whistleblower report that further incriminated Blackwell. The once powerful CEO was now backed into a corner. Mark's heart raced as the moment of reckoning drew closer. The tables had turned. The lies were no longer enough. The pressure was now on Blackwell. His associates were distancing themselves from him, and the company's financials were under intense scrutiny. The once proud executive was losing control, and Mark's fight for justice seemed within reach. The burden Mark had carried for so long was lifting, but every step forward felt like walking on a razor's edge. The courtroom was tense when Mark's case was finally revisited. Blackwell tried to turn the tables one last time, claiming that Mark had been involved in a larger scheme. But every accusation fell apart under the weight of the new evidence. The witnesses, the receipts, the phone records, they all pointed to one thing. Blackwell had orchestrated the entire scandal. Mark stood, his hands shaking, as the courtroom awaited the verdict. Linda had done everything she could. This was it, the final moment of his freedom. Would the judge believe the truth? Would Mark finally be free after years of wrongful imprisonment? The anticipation was unbearable. Everything Mark had endured had led to this very moment. The judge's gavel slammed down, and the room fell silent. Mark's heart raced. The judge declared that the charges against him were to be dropped. Blackwell was now the one facing criminal charges, his once impressive career in ruins. Mark had been vindicated. His life, shattered by false accusations, was finally restored. But one detail was always there, buried in plain sight. In a final confrontation, Mark faced Blackwell one last time. The CEO stood before him, powerless. Mark spoke of the years he'd lost, the family he'd been separated from, the reputation that had been destroyed. Blackwell had used his power to ruin Mark's life. Now, the truth had taken its rightful place, and Blackwell had nowhere to hide. As Blackwell's lies unraveled, his once loyal associates turned against him. The company he had built from the ground up was collapsing. Mark's name was cleared, but the damage to his reputation would never fully fade. Yet, as the truth came to light, Mark felt a deep sense of justice. The burden was finally off his shoulders. The truth exploded into the open. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of shock and disbelief. Mark had been wronged, but now, Blackwell was the one facing charges. Mark could finally breathe again. The lies that had consumed his life were now laid bare for all to see. And then every voice fell silent as the truth hit the table. Mark walked out of the courtroom a free man. The chains that had bound him for years were finally gone. His freedom, once a distant dream, was now a reality. The man who had been wrongfully accused had been exonerated, and the man who had framed him would face the consequences of his actions. As Mark stood outside, the world seemed to open up before him. His life had been forever changed by the injustice he had suffered. But now, with the truth revealed, Mark felt a new sense of purpose. His vindication was hard-won, but it was his. The scars would remain, but the lesson was clear: truth always finds a way. Mark stood in the empty parking lot, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows behind him. The receipt that had once been a symbol of his defeat now lay crumpled in his hand, but it had led him to freedom. Justice had been served, and the truth had come out. Lesson: the truth, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, has the power to set you free. Never stop fighting for what is right. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe to this channel and never miss the next case where truth prevails.